Hello, welcome back to the theatre. During our incredible block, we've been taking questions from the audience at home and the audience here. We'd like to welcome back all of our speakers from the block and the wonderful MVP, Owen Jones, who is going to be moderating and asking questions. So please come on stage.
Okay, thanks Emma. Welcome everyone to the Q&A session. If any of you haven't submitted any questions, go onto the app right now, and if you click the talk, the Q&A session, you can submit them there. I want to see some more questions. Okay, so let's look at one of the first questions for one of the Nikolajs. So, how much coverage is a good baseline? Do you need a high percentage to know you're doing acceptance testing right?
I mean, saying a percentage isn't really doing your case justice, right? I think as a minimum, you have to have the most important use cases, so let's say the 5 most important use cases, at least done right. So as we said, you get a lot of value just from a little bit of acceptance testing because you already hit a lot of code. And of course shoot for 100%, but probably not feasible.
And how would you go about, measuring how much you've hit?
There's actually a tool we use from JetBrains that's called .cover, where you can you can attach when you're running Umbraco, for example, and then you can run your suite of acceptance tests, and it will tell you a percentage of how much your code is hit.
Nice. And Paul asks, if you could only have unit tests or acceptance tests, which would you prioritize?
You like your arms or your legs better?
Just because we just did a talk about it, acceptance tests.
Nice answer. All right, so now questions for Corné. From Scott, is it true that Blazor server doesn't scale well? Do you think it can support large numbers of concurrent users?
That's a very good question. I guess it would very much depend on what you're trying to set up, how you would configure your server to interact. And I'm sure there's a way to also load balance your server, just like you would any other application. Might be a bit more trickier to set up, but fairly certain it should be possible. Nice.
And Jason asks, does Blazor offer full reactivity, like React and Vue, etc.?
I have to admit, I don't have any experience with the way how React or Vue handles it, but if we talk about reactivity as in things like lifecycle events and persistent state and stuff like that, then yes, very much possible. It has a very extensive set of events like that. So, yeah.
Cool. And another question is, would love to see the example of how to use the Blazor component in the back office. Can it be found in your code example?
Yeah, very much. It's available on GitHub. The back office example that I showcased is available on GitHub on Lee Messenger's GitHub. I'll be sure to link that where possible. But yeah, all the things that we showcased on my presentation today were open source. So yeah.
Nice. Where can we find that link? Was it?
I believe the link itself was actually in the presentation itself. So if people were to look it back, then it should be there.
Nice. And a question from Wilma. With server-side Blazor, if 2 separate components live outside of each other's scopes, but need to react off each other, how would this be properly handled? JS interoperability, got it, seems like a hacky solution for this, but is the only option.
I guess it would really depend on the use case. JavaScript interop would indeed be an option that is very well supported actually with Blazor. So it would, I guess, depend on how it's set up. But yeah, I guess it really depends on the specific use case that I don't have any specific experience with. So that's the best I can do.
Cool, thank you. And now a few questions for Carl. William asks, how is load balancing configured for multiple installed containers, each having their own listen port?
Yeah, so they each tend to list on a different port in my particular demo over here. But what you'd normally do is you wouldn't normally have your load balancer as a container itself. It would live outside of your infrastructure. So you'd have a separate load balancer, and you would expose the ports to that load balancer effectively. So yeah, you wouldn't do that in the container as itself.
Cool. Okie dokie. And another question is, can you pre-populate the database with test data so that if a new dev goes to pull down the dev branch, will they have test data just there?
Absolutely, yeah. You could do anything you wanted to. You could take a live site and export that database and put that into an image so that you not only have test data, but you actually have a copy of the live data. Ooh. So you could literally spin up an entire instance with a copy from last week's live site, and that would be absolutely fine.
And how hard would it be to update that? Say, for example, someone has pulled down the dev branch and they've got the test data for the dev branch. Mm-hmm. They add a couple new doc types or something. How would they go about updating that container for the dev branch?
So you'd want to rebuild the image, and it depends on where you're going to store your images. If you're going to have your own internal image repository, once you've built your image, you can push it to that repository. Or if you're basically going to do this on a public repository, you push it to Docker Hub. But yeah, it's two command lines to effectively rebuild it and then push it up to the command line. It's super easy, and I'll be going through that in my talks, my workshop later on today.
Nice.
No, Friday, sorry.
That sounds really good. Because I know coming into this, I was a bit like iffy on Docker because I've never really looked at it myself. But I've had people talk to me about it and say, like, yes, it's really good. I never work without it now.
Super exciting. I mean, I honestly think in 3, 4, 5 years' time, IaaS hosting of new projects is going to massively diminish, and people are going to move more to hosting their sites in Docker simply because the deployment process, and especially if you have a CI/CD pipeline, you can build your images in a CI/CD pipeline, so you don't actually even need to manually do that. You could configure it at any point in time to push it automatically to an image repository for you. So yeah, I think there's going to be a massive shift in the next 3, 4, 5 years to actually hosting applications in Docker outside of traditional IaaS, especially when more Linux hosting kind of comes on board as well. So.
Nice. Well, you've definitely convinced me. Because as soon as I saw you just set that all up with just a couple of lines, and then you've got the web apps, the
clone the repository, run Docker Compose up, and away you go. It's
I feel really
super cool.
I feel really outdated now. Just open up, creating my database, importing data.
I mean, I've got to the point where I don't run SQL Server on my dev machines anymore. Oh, wow. I just haven't bothered with that. I run a Docker image depending on which project I'm running. So if I'm working on project A, I'll have a database image for that. If I switch to a different project, I can turn that container off and start a new one up. Nice. And I can swap it in and out depending on which one I'm running. So I don't have one SQL Server with 50 databases all attached, taking up hard disk space and memory in my local dev machine. I just have the ones I specifically need, which is really cool.
That is really good. I'm definitely a Docker convert now. And one last question from Thomas saying, with Docker, how does the cost of hosting compare to traditional infrastructure setups?
I don't have numbers on that, unfortunately, I mean, it will be cheaper because you don't have as much overhead. If you take the cost of a CPU cycle and the cost of your memory resources and the cost of your storage, Docker is much less compared to traditional hosting on all of those measures. So, of course, it will be cheaper just based on those numbers alone. But I don't have specific numbers in terms of how much cheaper it's going to be to host in Docker versus traditional IaaS hosting. I mean, it's not just cheaper, but it'll also be faster because you have fewer layers between your application and the bare metal. Nice. You're basically going through a virtualization layer, passing it to the host operating system, and then you're hitting bare metal straight away. You don't have other levels to go through. So.
Nice. Oh, a few more questions have popped up.
Gosh.
Thank you. So have you had much luck with attaching a debugger to a process in a container?
Yeah, VS Code has got tools to allow you to attach to a live debugger, but you don't need to. I mean, you don't actually need to use Docker. You can build your entire app and your website locally, run it in Kestrel. You don't need to run the actual application in Docker to debug it. I can debug it with normal Visual Studio 2022 and just run it locally, do all my debugging locally. When I'm happy that it works, I then build the image out of it. So I don't need to use Docker for my development process. It's more my testing and live process internally.
Okay, so following on from that, if you were using, say, Visual Studio Full 2022 for development, but then you're using like your database in Docker, Could you connect to the database in Docker?
Absolutely.
Yep, just with a normal query.
I mean, I can open SQL Server Management Studio. I can directly connect to it and run any queries I want to. It will be no different to how I'd connect to a local database server. It looks basically identical, except the icon on the top says Linux on there as opposed to Windows. That's the only
I don't know
difference.
about that then.
No, it's basically the same. You don't notice or see any difference between how you run the application, how you debug the application. It's basically the same as you do now, except that when you come to publish it and run it, you have an extra step that I build an image and then publish that image up there. Things you have to take into account, like I covered, is where I don't want my media to be part of the image because that's content. That's not something that I distribute normally as part of my website. But you already do that when you don't include your media folder in your publish settings. You have a git ignore which says ignore all the media. What you could do is you can have all your media hosted on cloud, or you could have your media hosted on a NAS externally to all your Docker images and get to them that way. And then, if I have 4, 5, 6 Docker instances running, they all share that same media folder.
Nice.
It's bloody awesome.
It is. It seems really good. Cool. So a few additional questions for all of you now. Why did you choose your talk? Why did you choose this topic as your talk?
I really like Docker.
I think that was an easy one, though.
I really like Blazor.
There we go. Don't say it.
No. Well, yes, we do like an acceptance test, but I'm not really sure why we picked it. Really, I think we felt we had something to say about this topic, so it seemed like a go-to to talk about it, and it seems like I just told Emma about this earlier, but like when I started as an intern a long time ago, it's like acceptance test, and like no one like really cared that much. And it's nice to see that it's finally starting to get some traction and people actually doing it now. So I think just trying to be a part of that, I think that's the main motivator.
Nice. Okay, so which kind of test do you guys think is the coolest? Who asked this?
Well, we just did a talk on acceptance test, so of course they're the coolest.
I don't know if you've looked at before, but this is kind of question for you. Have you looked at mutation testing at all? It's quite a new testing where you effectively create an output and you cache that output. And then if you make a change, you then compare your output to the output. If the output is the same, you don't, that test passes. So you don't need to look at it visually. You're not running tests in a runner. You're basically looking at the UI output, but effectively saving that to a file and comparing the specific output that file. It's quite new. I don't know much about it, but I've been looking at that, and that looks like quite a cool new kind of way of testing applications, especially website. I kind of touch on that because one of the nice things that Docker allows you to do is I can spin up the entire website, database, everything on my local environment and run all my tests against that environment. So I don't need to wait until I publish it to staging. I can run all my tests completely locally, and that's one of the cool things that I'm looking forward to doing more of with Docker.
Nice. Cool. And for the rest of Codegarden, what are you most excited about seeing? Any specific talks or activities? Games?
Just being here and just being with the people again that we've not seen for 3 years. It's really nice to be back in the community again, and everyone's face is 3 years older and not quite the same as your Twitter picture, so I don't recognize all of you anymore. But it's nice being in the crowd and being friendly people in this community is just awesome. So that's me.
Yeah, and I completely agree with Carl. This is my first in-person Codegarden, so it's great to be finally able to meet.
MVP as well, so.
And MVP as well. But just finally being able to meet so many great people over the next couple of days, and even today, something I'm really looking forward to. Also really looking forward to your workshop this Friday. We'll be attending that for sure in person. And just trying to learn a lot of things, and we're going to have a great time.
Yeah, if you asked me before the talk, I would say I was looking forward to my talk finishing. But no, for me, I think what I'm really looking forward to is also talking to people and engaging with them outside of the issue tracker, because it's actually maybe getting some positive views for once.
Yeah, and I saw Martinez there, so of course Umbraco Coffee. But also, I just look forward to, again, meeting all people. I'm also new here. I started in last August. Haven't really interacted much with people in real life, so it's good to meet everyone.
Okay, and if anyone was to bump into you around Codegarden, what is the topic that would most likely get you chatting?
Acceptance tests.
Yeah, and I think other than that, pretty much for me, anything that's not front end, I'm good to go.
I agree. Yep.
Yeah, same. We're all back end there.
Nice.
Exactly.
Cool. So that's all the questions on the list. Does anyone else here have any burning questions that they haven't submitted at all? Nope. Okay, great. Cool. So, yeah.
Thank you, Owen.
Thank you, everyone, for coming to the Q&A. A big round of applause for all our speakers.
Thank you, people. Go and relax, celebrate, enjoy the talk being finished. Thank you so much for coming along to the Q&A session. We're going to be saying goodbye for a short time. Enjoy the video that's about to play, and I'll see you all around.